Welcome to the Jill on Money Show. It's Sunday, August 28th. And in today's second part of our interview with Brad Stulberg, the author of The Practice of Groundedness, we are trying to think about how to bring our generations together. I'm kind of getting sick of this whole trope around, this is what this generation is like, and this is what this generation's like. I just don't think it helps anybody. So maybe it's just about all of us coming together and saying we want more grounded lives. We want to make sure that we are all doing things that make us feel connected to the larger organization for whom we work, or maybe it's just your individual contribution to a larger effort. But let's stop doing this whole generation thing. I don't know. I think that we can probably try to do a better job with that. Anyway, here is the second part of our interview with Brad Stulberg. I'm wondering this idea of, nourishing your roots, which I really do love. How can I best, as an old fart who's gone through these ups and downs and lots of downs, certainly professionally and in life and relationships, how can I explain this focus on your roots in a way that, a 30-year-old can hear it, or even middle age who are trying to find the groundedness, besides obviously giving them your book, but talking about it with them? What is it that people need to think about?
Yeah, and there's one more age group too. And, you strike me as the kind of person that loves your craft. You're clearly good at it. I'm not just trying to butter you up. You'll probably work till you die. A lot of people, when they retire, they run into the same problem that the 30-year-old runs into, which is who am I? I feel unmoored. Anyways, to answer your question, if you think about a big old redwood tree, I didn't grow up. I grew up in suburban Detroit, but I feel like I grew up in the Bay Area because I spent my young adulthood. I spent a lot of time in the Bay Area. I lived there for 9.5 years. And there were these massive redwood trees. And when you would stand underneath one and be in its presence, you can't help but feel awe. They're 100 feet tall. They have this beautiful, big, lush overstory, and their trunks are just enormous. Nobody looks down at the ground and thinks, the roots are what holds this tree up throughout all kind of weather. So we look at the branches, we look at the overstory, we look at the trunk, and that's where we see the beauty. But when it storms, it's none of that keeps the tree solid, attached to the ground. It's the root system. And we're the same way. So the stuff that really allows us to be our best, allows us to grow our metaphorical overstory, allows us to have this really strong core, is often hidden from view. And that to me is the best way to explain it. You want to be this massive redwood tree in your own life and do great things and have this strong, solid core. Well, you're only going to be as strong as your root system. I'm
wondering about one of the 6 principles specifically, and it's about vulnerability. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about this concept. And I have a very specific reason I'm asking this, and that you say that embrace vulnerability to develop genuine strength and confidence. And you talk about showing up authentically. And, I think this is a really hard concept because people say, well, if I show up authentically, then my boss isn't going to appreciate who I am. And I'm scared, or I don't really think I'm in a safe enough environment to do that, or I'm this, whatever it is. But this particular one of the 6 principles really popped out at me. So I'm wondering if we could go there a little bit.
I'm going to start with the science, and then I'm going to tell a story.
Okay.
So the science is very clear. Researchers at the University of Manningham, which is a school in Germany, they ran a series of multiple experiments. All the experiments had the same gist. They had 2 people sit down across from each other and have an intimate conversation. And the sharer was instructed to be very vulnerable. And not performative vulnerability I didn't sleep well, or I'm struggling with my nutrition, but real vulnerability. I've suffered from mental illness. I've been divorced. I lost a spouse. I lost a child. I'm estranged from my parents. The stuff that makes you uncomfortable. And they went on and they had a conversation. After the conversation, the person that was doing the sharing said that they felt weak, ashamed, sometimes embarrassed. The person that was on the receiving end said that they respected that person, they admired that person, and they felt that that person epitomized strength. So there's this paradox that when you're being vulnerable, it can make you feel weak, but it helps others perceive you as strong. And that like human connection is so powerful. So here's the story that really brings that science to life. In my executive coaching practice, I was working with a woman, I'm going to call her Donna. And she had ascended to the C-suite of this mega international company. Her colleagues lovingly called her the double only because she was the only woman in the C-suite and the only Black person in the C-suite. And she herself was not targeting this role. She calls herself an accidental executive. And she had massive imposter syndrome right off the bat. And particularly when she was speaking to audiences overseas. And she was on the roadshow talking about company vision and values, and she'd get up on the stage and she would be anxious. She'd feel like she's performing. And I said, well, Donna, not her real name, I've changed it. Donna, what do you actually want to say? She said, what I really want to say, Brad, is that I'm pretty overwhelmed. I never thought I'd be here. And I said, well, why don't you say that? And she said, they're going to lose confidence in me. And I said, whoa. I've been public about having the most bizarro, terrifying, crippling thoughts, and you pay me all this money to coach you. Did you lose confidence in me? She said, no. Actually, I trust you more because of it. I'm like, so why don't you give it a try? So the next time she had one of these talks, she got up on the stage and she said just that. She said, I'm overwhelmed. I'm in awe that I got here. I'm not sure how. She spun it a little and she said, that's why it's so important that you all, hundreds of employees and staff, are showing up, giving us feedback, helping us co-create this, on and on. Sure enough, she felt so free on the stage giving that talk, and the feedback was the best it had ever been. She was more engaging. They could see her as a human. So I think that it takes like this hump of getting over, but once you get over that hump, you realize that it's a lot more free, not to feel like you're always having to perform, and people like you more.
Two things come to mind when you tell that story. One is I was asked to interview Shonda Rhimes, I think it was in 2014, in front of a live audience of a bunch of like very high-powered Wall Street executive women. It was insane. There was like 2,500 people spill over. She was really, and what I didn't know is that she was in the beginning part of her year of yes, which was she decided she's a very shy person. And she decided that she was going to really try to get herself out there. And it's hard for her to do. So we're doing, these pre-calls that you have. And like her people are on and she gets on the phone. And it was a rough call. I'm going to tell you the truth, guys. Like I was freaking scared of her and I was worried. I went to talk to a lot of people who like knew people who knew her. And I'm like, you got to help me out. I don't know how to do these entertainment people. CEOs are easy for me. I was pretty anxious for this event. She was shy. So I think that was important for me to understand that. That's what someone said to me. Is like, don't take this as cold, take it as shy. She's shy. So in the beginning, it's just like, tell me a little bit about yourself. And then you're at that moment where you look at the clock and you're like, oh my God, 5 minutes has passed and I have to like do 35 more minutes. It's going to be impossible. And I asked her what I thought was a simple question about how she tries to balance being a mother and running a 600-person organization. And she looked out in the crowd and she had this moment where it was like, okay, this is going to be good. I can almost tell. She said, well, the way I think about it is every day as a working parent, essentially I fail. And the whole audience almost audibly gasped. Failed? What do you mean? She's like the most successful showrunner and she's this and she's that. And she looked out and she said, let me explain this to you. She said, one of my kids had to do a concert on the same day that Sandra Oh was leaving Grey's Anatomy. And I had to pick one or the other. And she looked out and she goes, you guys have this choice every day. There's something you're missing in one side of your life because you're doing something else in the other side of your life. And she said, and I finally realized that like, I'm not going to be able to do two things at once. In one hand, I'm going to feel like a failure. On the other hand, I'm going to feel like a failure. And she goes, and then I just decided like, so what? What's the big deal? Like, so yeah. So what if I am failing, at this thing? That's just the way, these are the choices I have. And it was wild to look at the audience and see everybody's minds just racing at that moment. So, of course, I said, what'd you do? She's like, well, I failed at a boss because I went to my kid's concert and I wasn't there for the last day Sandra Oh was on my set after, being on the program for, I think, 10 or 11 years. And you know what? It was such a great moment. From that moment on, she became a different person. The audience looked at her a different way, and I did too. And I feel like that kind of vulnerability is something she wasn't comfortable with, but it like broke down the barrier and made the interview fantastic. Like if people didn't love her before, man, did they love her at that moment.
First off, thank you for sharing that story. I love it. It absolutely embodies what I'm talking about with vulnerability. And you look at like a lot of problematic things in society, and it tends to be because people are going around having convinced themselves that they're bulletproof and they do have everything figured out. And it's really made me realize that, hey, if someone says like, I've got everything figured out, I've got it all together, you should probably run the other way.
Right.
I mean, seriously, it's not to say that like, there's a difference between expertise and someone that's completely making it up. But in a way, like vulnerability and humility are such close cousins because it keeps you, talk about keeping you grounded, it keeps you on earth if you can regularly kind of just reflect on areas that get to the heart of where you feel like you're coming up short or you're feeling or that you're scared. And also on the other side of our vulnerabilities tend to be our core values. So if you're really vulnerable and scared of talking to other people, it's probably because you value connection so much. If you're terrified of mortality, it's probably because you value life. If you're scared of being alone, probably because you value love. So by exploring our vulnerabilities, we also get a pretty clear answer of what it is that we should be prioritizing in our lives.
Something really jumped out at me, and Mark and I talk about this all the time, about something you write about with self-determination theory. You say that SDT demonstrates that humans thrive when three basic needs are met: autonomy, or the ability to have at least some control over how we spend our time and energy. And Mark and I talk about this all the time because obviously we're kind of running our own little lives here, right? This like Jill on Moneyland. And I feel like that has been the greatest gift that I could have expected in my professional life. And it is so much more important than money. So much more important. I'm wondering if that autonomy piece is also one of those things that came out of the COVID era that, finally you didn't have the bosses saying like, you have to be here at this time, at this, like, it was like, get your work done. We're all in this together. Life's crazy. You got your kids on the Zoom, come back to here. But like that you felt some control. You didn't have to get on the treadmill at the exact same time to catch the train or sit in traffic. And I want to know why that autonomy piece becomes so important in our lives.
Autonomy is so important. You're spot on. Now, there's a couple ways to think about it. The first is that going back to like this notion of mortality, we're all going to die unless, Peter Thiel or whoever can figure out the way to live forever. I'm not betting on it. So deep down inside, we all know that we have limited time and limited energy. And feeling like it is constrained by external forces is not a good feeling. Of course not. You don't want, it's that simple. You don't want people telling you what you have to do and where you have to spend your energy. Now, there's always going to be some degree of that because we live in a society. You have to stop at a red light. You're also going to be in professional situations where you're in organizations where you have to do stuff that you don't want to do. But too much of that, and talk about sucking your soul, it really starts to suck to crush your soul. And I think that the more that you can give yourself autonomy, and if you're a manager or a leader listening to this, the more that you can give your people autonomy, the better you'll feel or the better your staff will feel. And same thing goes with performance. And for the people listening out here that are really dialed in on money, I make such a strong argument in the book, and I make this all the time with people that are chasing money, that real wealth is actually the ability to choose how you spend your time and energy. And money can be a gateway to that, and it never hurt, and it actually helps quite a bit. But once you get to a point where you have the ability to buy your autonomy, then chasing more money for the sake of chasing more money might be what you want to do, but it's worth stepping back and evaluating. That's such an important thing. And again, an important part of groundedness, because the more money, it's just more, it's out in front of you. Whereas if you can say like, hey, I can afford healthcare, I can live the lifestyle I want. Well, then to me, that's real wealth.
Thanks so much to Brad Stulberg. Again, this is a re-airing of an interview that we had conducted previously. If you have financial questions that come up as you think about what you want to do next in your life, we'd love to hear from you. Go to JillOnMoney.com, JillOnMoney.com, click the Contact Us button. Let us know if you would be willing to come on the air. Try to do something nice for someone else today. Grit, growth, grace. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.